Hello and welcome to this screencast on a comparison between the pairs of studies. This one's looking specifically at the pair of studies which are in the second part of the social area of psychology, which are specifically Piliavin and Levine. Okay, so in your booklet you will find that I have done one of these for you. All we're going to do in this particular screencast is to look through these, make sure we understand how we do them, okay, how we put them together, and also I'm going to give you some more examples of ones that you could use when you're doing your own. Okay, so let's have a look at the first one, which has, as I say, has been done for you. So we look at similarities first of all. Both studies produce easily analysed quantitative data. Okay, so that's a similarity. So we'd start off that paragraph. Remember, these are point, explain, example paragraphs. I took a bit of getting out, but you know what I mean. So PEEE paragraphs, okay, for the similarities. So we start off by saying a similarity between the Levine study and the Piliavin study is that they both produce easily analysed quantitative data. Fantastic, okay? All you now need to say after that is what you mean by quantitative data. So quantitative data is data which is in the numerical form, okay? So it produces numbers, in other words. Then after that, you need to give an example of quantitative data from the Piliavin study. Okay, so an example of that would be Piliavin study produces, just say what it is. And then the same for the Levine study. Okay, so you would produce a PEEE format on that one pretty easily, I would have said. You could throw in there that it supports psychology of science if you wanted to, if you want to be a bit evaluative about it as well. That's really up to you, but you can stick to just the quantitative data for the time being. Hopefully that similarity paragraph is a pretty straightforward one. Let's have a look at the difference one then. So I've said here the studies used different research methods. So you'd start off there. A difference between the Piliavin and the Levine study is that they use different research methods. Fantastic, right? So what different research methods did they use? Piliavin study used a field experiment. So you would then say what you meant by field experiment there. Okay, so field experiment is one whereby the IV is manipulated in a natural setting. And that's what we've said here. And then all you would then need to do is to just explain what Piliavin did. So what did he actually manipulate and what was the natural setting? Okay, so that would define the field experiment side of it. Then you would say, well, Levine used a quasi-experiment. What do we mean by a quasi-experiment? Is where the IV, in this case, the cities or countries, was naturally occurring. Okay? Then say exactly how they went about that particular study in terms of a quasi-experiment. So you would produce a point, explanation, an example from Piliavin. Then you would explain again using the Levine study, and then you would use Levine as an example. So with the differences is point is PEEEE. So you just throw in another E there really to help. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So those are the two that I've done for you in the booklet already. Let's have a look at some others then. Like I say, students very often find similarities and differences a little bit tricky to start off with, so hopefully this will help a fair amount. Okay, let's have a look at the similarity here. So I've said that both studies are useful. Now you could have used this one as a difference if you wanted to, because one study is definitely a little bit more useful than the other one. You could say that maybe the Piliavin study is a bit more useful than Levine, which is a shame because Levine put a heck of a lot of effort into it, didn't he really? But there you go, that's the case of it. Let's just deal with it as a similarity to start off with, make this a bit more simple. Both studies are useful, so a similarity between Piliavin and Levine study is that they are both useful. Now, remember, usefulness is something that you can use in lots and lots of different ways. You could have said, for instance, that they're both useful because they produce ecologically valid data. Fantastic. Okay, you could use it that way. You could say that they're useful because they produce or they use standardized procedures and therefore produce reliable data. Excellent. Again, all of those are absolutely fine. Link it back to methodological issues should you wish. In this particular situation, I've used a slightly different way of going about it, and I've talked about the explanations that they give for behaviour. So that's another way that you can think about usefulness as well. So both studies are useful. Piliavin helped to change understanding of the role of diffusion of responsibility in helping behaviour. Okay, remember before Piliavin came along, there was this big moral outrage, wasn't there, about the fact that people were very, very unhelpful, even in desperately awful situations like the Kitty Genovese case, which forms the background of the Piliavin study. But Piliavin changed that, certainly, by suggesting actually diffusion of responsibility didn't exist in certain situations, or certainly wasn't as big a factor as people thought it was. Levine told us that helping behaviour is not simply correlated to individualistic and collectivist cultures. That was kind of one of the aims of the study, wasn't it? And he kind of proved himself wrong. But importantly, that's a good thing, because what it's done is it's generated further questions to research. So even when kind of psychology goes a little bit wrong, which I don't think you can necessarily say that in the Levine study, but it certainly didn't produce massively definitive results, did it? It's still useful because it forms the basis of further research. We do have to twist it a little bit to get it to work for Levine, but it does in this particular case, I think. Okay, let's have a look at the difference then. So the studies used different research designs. You just got to be really careful. Make sure you don't sort of talk about the aims of the studies so much. They're not really particularly applicable when it comes to differences and similarities, but you certainly can talk about design. So you could have talked about the design in terms of independent measures or repeated measures, whatever it happens to be. Independent measures in each one of these, and that could have been a similarity, couldn't it? But in terms of research designs, well, Levine used a cross-cultural design. Okay, so that definitely is a major difference there, isn't it? Because he sought to find out the differences in helping behaviour across different cultures. So that was specifically the aim of what he wanted to do, and he used a cross-cultural design in order to allow him to do that. Piliavin's study, on the other hand, was not cross-cultural. It was simply based in one particular culture, wasn't it? The culture of the US, and specifically New York City. Okay, so again, a difference there. Just think about the way we put different paragraphs together with the format that I spoke about before. All right, let's have a look at the last one before I get you to think about some yourself. So a similarity here, both studies provide free will and deterministic explanations to explain behaviour. Right, now this is pushing the boat out a little bit more for you. This takes a bit more thinking about. If you think about the Piliavin study for a moment, and this has been covered in the podcast, by the way, so do listen to the podcast about this. The Piliavin study suggests that actually the reasons why people either help or don't help is to do with the situation that they're placed in, absolutely, and that will be a deterministic explanation, but is also down to a cost-reward analysis, which is done individually. So people work out whether this is actually worth their while or not. So in other words, there's a cognitive element to this, which is mediating the response that people provide. As a consequence of that, then you have a free will element to this particular experimental understanding of the behaviour, certainly. The Levine study has the same sort of thing going on to a certain degree, but probably not quite, but it's still a similarity in that even though there is nurture explanations given for why it is that people behave in the way that they do, okay, still people do make a decision either to behave to help or not, okay. So irrespective of the nurture that people have had, they will still either decide to help or not, okay, and that will be an individual explanation again, I suppose, and you could say that there is a degree of free will involved in that. I hope that makes a bit of sense. That is probably the trickiest one on here, and if you get that one, then you're doing really, really well, okay. More of that in year 2, but for the time being, just have a go with that one, see how you get on with that paragraph, but that is a bit tricky. And the last one is ethnocentrism here. There's clearly a difference in the ethnocentrism of both of these studies. The Piliavin study is an ethnocentric study, although again you could make a claim that it's not quite as ethnocentric as some, because New York City is a highly diverse culture. But I think by and large you could say it's ethnocentric because it is just based in one culture, and its results are used to generate understanding of behaviour in other cultures, which is not necessarily allowed to do really, or shouldn't really do. So it's an ethnocentric explanation of behaviour, and Levine's study is clearly designed not to be ethnocentric. It's cross-cultural, isn't it? So there is a low degree of ethnocentrism, presumably, in Levine's study. Again, though, you could make a claim that Levine's study has some problems here because it uses a very small sample. So yeah, I mean, whether that affects the ethnocentrism or not is another matter, but it's something worth thinking about. So it'd be worthwhile having a go at producing the P paragraphs for those ones that I've got down there. That one in particular is a bit more tricky, but give it a go. If you want to really stretch yourself here, let's have a think about a few others. We could certainly look for a similarity in terms of the ethics of each one of these. Okay, they both have ethical issues and specific ethical issues to do with working in the field. Like I say, they're not necessarily field experiments, but they're working in the field, aren't they? And therefore, maybe informed consent might be an issue there. The last one, I can't remember what the last one was. Oh, yes, reductionism and holism. Have a think about whether you could generate a P paragraph for that one, either in terms of the similarities or differences. Remember, please, do not use social sensitivity here. Social sensitivity isn't really an applicable one here, and it's not the same as ethics. So try and get out of the habit of mixing up those two things. I hope all that makes sense. Like I say, use this information to produce some P paragraphs yourself, add a few more yourself as well if you can. And like I say, I hope that's been helpful to you.